The data streams made no sense anymore. Dr. Lyra Venish stared at her screens, watching numbers that should have been impossible. Deep beneath Serenara's surface, the planetary core had begun its final collapse. Centuries ago, her ancestors had mined too deep, extracted too much, and now the bill had come due. 6 months. That was all they had left. Around her, the research facility hummed with quiet desperation. Her colleagues moved between workstations, their pale blue skin almost translucent under the soft lighting. Serenarans had never known real fear before. Their world had always been gentle, predictable, safe. The strongest storm in recorded history had barely rustled the leaves. The most dangerous predator was a small creature that ate fruits and occasionally startled people. But now their planet was dying, and nobody seemed to care. "Any responses from the Galactic Council?" Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer. Her assistant, Mora, shook her head. "They sent their official statement an hour ago. Thoughts and sympathy. They suggest we begin archiving our cultural records for preservation." Lyra felt something cold settle in her chest. Preservation. As if 4 million living beings could be replaced by database entries and historical footnotes. The Council represented 47 civilized species, worlds with technologies that could move mountains, redirect rivers, even stabilize planetary cores. But apparently, none of that mattered when profit margins came into question. She pulled up the responses they had received. The Virin Collective cited budget constraints. The merchants of Tau Prime calculated insufficient return on investment. The peaceful harmonics of Cygnus sent beautiful poetry about accepting fate with grace. Every single one had found a reason to look away. "What about individual governments, private corporations?" Lyra pressed. "The shipping guilds say it would take too many vessels to evacuate our population. The terraforming companies suggest we should have purchased planetary insurance. Everyone has a reason why they cannot help." Lyra pulled up a star map, watching the trade routes that connected the civilized galaxy like glowing threads. Hundreds of worlds, thousands of stations, all linked in an intricate web of commerce and culture. And yet, when one of those worlds called for help, the web felt more like a cage. High Keeper Oreth entered the facility, his long robes trailing behind him. At 200 years old, he was one of the eldest Serenarans alive, and for the first time he looked every day of it. "We are preparing the open broadcast," he said quietly. "If the Council will not help, perhaps someone else will hear." "High Keeper, the open channels are full of pirates, isolationists, and uncontacted species," Mora protested. "Sending our coordinates could." "Could what? Make our situation worse?" Oreth's voice was gentle but firm. "We are already dying, child. Pride is a luxury we can no longer afford." The broadcast went out that evening. Lyra helped craft it, stripping away diplomatic language and replacing it with simple truth. They were dying. They needed help. They had nowhere else to turn. The message carried their coordinates, their population data, and a plea that felt like surrender. For 3 days, nothing came back except silence. Lyra stopped sleeping properly. She would doze at her workstation, jolting awake whenever a new tremor shook the facility. The quakes were getting stronger. Her models now predicted 5 months instead of 6. Time was accelerating away from them like water through cupped hands. On the 4th day, a response finally arrived. It came through the emergency channel, bypassing all normal communication protocols. The signal was strong, clear, and completely unregistered in any galactic database. Lyra's computer flagged it immediately with warning symbols she had never seen before. She opened the message. 3 words in basic galactic standard: "Received, coming, hold on." Lyra's hands shook as she traced the signal back to its source. The coordinates led to a yellow star system in a sparse region of space that most civilized species avoided. Her database search pulled up a single entry, and her blood went cold. Earth, classification, Class 12 Deathworld. Status, quarantine zone, warning, extreme planetary conditions. Dominant species evolved through predation and environmental hostility, approach not recommended for standard biologics. There were stories about Deathworlders, whispered in the safe stations around gentle stars, beings that came from hell planets where everything tried to kill you, species that had clawed their way to intelligence through violence and survival. The galaxy kept them at arm's length, safely contained in their dangerous corners of space. And now they were coming here. "High Keeper," Lyra called out, her voice cracking. "We have a response." Orath rushed to her station, reading the message over her shoulder. His eyes widened as he saw the origin point. "Deathworlders," he whispered. "Are we so desperate that we would invite such creatures to our world?" Lyra looked at the seismic data scrolling across her other screen. Another tremor, stronger than the last. Somewhere on the southern continent, a coastal city had just experienced its first earthquake in recorded history. People were terrified, infrastructure was failing, and they had less than 5 months to save everyone. "Yes," she said simply, "we are exactly that desperate." The hours that followed were filled with frantic debate. The council sent a strongly worded advisory against accepting help from unregistered species. Several prominent Saranarans argued that death with dignity was preferable to whatever these humans might do to them. Fear spread through the population like a virus. But the tremors kept coming, and the clock kept ticking. 3 weeks later, Lyra stood in the primary observation facility, watching the orbital sensors with her heart pounding against her ribs. They had picked up the FTL signatures an hour ago. Multiple vessels, moving faster than anything in the Saranaran fleet could match. The ships dropped into normal space like falling stars. There were dozens of them, massive and scarred, with hull designs that prioritized function over beauty. They moved with precise coordination, establishing orbit in a pattern that spoke of military discipline. Lyra's sensors screamed warnings about their weapon systems, energy signatures that could crack a moon. A communication request came through. Lyra accepted it, and a face appeared on her screen. The human was female, with dark skin and eyes that sat too far forward, predator style. She wore a uniform that looked both professional and battle-worn. When she smiled, Lyra noticed her teeth were flat except for 4 sharp ones designed for tearing. "Dr. Venish, I'm Captain Rebecca Stone, commanding the Terran evacuation fleet. We got your message. We're here to help." Lyra found her voice. You actually came." Rebecca's smile widened. "Yeah, we did. Now let's get to work. We've got 4 million people to move and not much time to do it. Send us your population distribution data, infrastructure maps, and any environmental hazards we should know about. My people will start landing within the hour." "Your people?" Lyra asked weakly. 47 ships, 12,000 personnel, and enough transport capacity to relocate your entire civilization. We brought extra just in case your numbers were off." Rebecca glanced at something off-screen. "Fair warning, Doctor. We move fast and we don't always explain everything before we do it. But I promise you this, we didn't come all this way to let anyone get left behind." The communication ended, and Lyra sat in stunned silence. Around her, her colleagues stared at the orbital display where human ships were already deploying smaller craft toward the surface. The Deathworlders had arrived, and everything was about to change. The first human shuttle touched down in an agricultural field outside the capital city. Lyra watched from a safe distance as the craft settled onto Saranara's gentle soil with surprising delicacy. The landing gear barely left impressions in the soft ground, despite the shuttle's obvious mass and battle-scarred hull. The boarding ramp descended with a hydraulic hiss that made several Saranaran observers flinch. What emerged made them take several steps backward. Humans moved wrong. That was Lyra's first coherent thought. In Saranara's low gravity, most beings glided gracefully, their movements flowing like water. But these humans walked with controlled power, each step deliberate and heavy. Their muscles were visible through their uniforms, corded and dense in ways that suggested a high-gravity homeworld. The lead human removed his helmet, revealing features that triggered every prey instinct Lyra's species had evolved past millennia ago. Forward-facing eyes, positioned for tracking movement and judging distance. A strong jaw that suggested biting power. Broad shoulders that spoke of grappling strength. This was a creature built to hunt, to fight, to survive. Dr. Venesh, his voice was deep, carrying easily across the field. I'm Dennis Walsh, Ground Operations Coordinator. We need to talk logistics. Lyra forced herself to approach, fighting the urge to flee. Up close, the human was even more intimidating. He towered over her, easily twice her mass, and when he smiled in greeting, she saw those disturbing canine teeth again. You're wearing environmental suits, Lyra observed, grasping for something normal to discuss. Our atmosphere is compatible with your biology according to the databases. Dennis nodded, running a hand through short dark hair. Standard precaution. We don't take chances with contamination, either direction. We'll do full environmental testing before we remove the suits around your population. No point saving you from a dying planet just to introduce some Earth bacteria that wipes you out. The casual way he discussed potential extinction scenarios made Lyra's skin crawl. But there was logic in it, a kind of ruthless pragmatism that was foreign to Sarenaran thinking. Within hours, more shuttles arrived. Humans poured out, moving with frightening efficiency. They carried equipment Lyra didn't recognize, set up temporary structures at speeds that seemed impossible, and began scanning everything with devices that hummed with power. Captain Rebecca Stone arrived on the third shuttle, stepping out with the same predatory grace Lyra had seen in her transmission. She carried herself like someone accustomed to being in charge, but when she greeted High Keeper Orath, her demeanor shifted to something more respectful. High Keeper, thank you for trusting us with this, Rebecca said. I know we're not what you expected. Orath studied her with ancient eyes. You are creatures of violence, he said quietly. Your very existence speaks of a world that tried to kill you at every turn. Why would such beings travel across the galaxy to save people they have never met? Rebecca's expression softened. Because we know what it's like when nobody comes. We've faced disasters on Earth, and we've learned that the only thing that matters in those moments is whether people help each other. Everything else is just noise. She pulled up a holographic display, showing a three-dimensional map of Sarenara. Red zones marked areas of highest seismic activity. Blue dots represented population centers. We're going to evacuate 4 million people in 3 months. It's aggressive, but your timeline doesn't give us much choice. We've brought 47 transport ships with more coming. Each can carry 50,000 in emergency conditions. Where will you take us? Lyra asked. We've designated one of our colony worlds as a temporary refuge. New Haven. It's a frontier world, rough by your standards but livable. You'll stay there until we can help you find a permanent home or terraform a new planet for your people. Dennis stepped forward, highlighting different regions on the map. We'll establish processing centers in each major population zone. Medical screening, documentation, family grouping. We move people in organized waves, heaviest risk areas first. Your coastal cities are going to be problems when the seismic activity increases, so they're priority one. Lyra watched as they detailed a plan that would have taken Sarenaran bureaucracy years to organize. The humans had calculated it in days, accounting for variables she hadn't even considered. They had backup plans for their backup plans, contingencies stacked on contingencies. You move very fast, Orath observed. Rebecca nodded. We have to. Every hour we waste is an hour closer to catastrophic failure. Time is the enemy here, not distance or logistics. We fight time by refusing to slow down. Over the next week, the human operation expanded at a dizzying pace. Temporary structures appeared overnight, forming entire small cities designed purely for processing evacuees. Human engineers worked in shifts that seemed inhumane, 16 hours on and 8 hours off, day after day without complaint. Lyra found herself assigned as a liaison, which meant following Dennis Walsh around and trying to keep up. The man moved like gravity affected him differently, which she supposed it did. Earth's gravity was nearly 3 times Serenara's. These humans were literally built stronger just to stand upright on their homeworld. You wear protective gear even when sleeping, Lyra observed one evening, watching the human rest areas. Dennis glanced at the sealed tents where off-duty personnel recovered. Until we're certain about biological compatibility, yes, it's uncomfortable but it's necessary. We've seen what happens when species mix microbiomes without proper precautions. It's not pretty. Your species thinks in terms of worst-case scenarios, Lyra said. Our species survived because we thought in terms of worst-case scenarios, Dennis corrected. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. That's not pessimism, Doctor. That's how you make sure people live. A tremor rolled through the ground, gentle by Serenaran standards but noticeable. Dennis didn't even pause in his work. Lyra realized with a start that the humans had stopped reacting to the quakes entirely. To them, this was normal, manageable, just another problem to solve. High Keeper Oreth found Lyra that night, watching human crews work under portable lights that turned night into day. "What do you think of them?" he asked. Lyra considered the question carefully. "They terrify me," she admitted, "but they're also the most competent beings I've ever encountered. They approach this disaster like it's a puzzle to solve rather than a tragedy to mourn." "Perhaps," Oreth said slowly, "that is what it takes to survive on a death world. The ability to face horror and simply get to work." Below them, humans continued their endless labor, racing against time to save a civilization they had never met. The first major earthquake hit 3 weeks into the evacuation. Magnitude 7.2, centered beneath the coastal city of Varesh. For Serenarans, it was apocalyptic. Buildings swayed, infrastructure crumbled, and panic flooded the streets as people experienced true geological violence for the first time in their species' history. The humans barely reacted. Lyra was in the main operations center when it happened, standing next to Dennis Walsh as the ground rolled beneath their feet. She grabbed onto a support beam, her legs trembling with fear. Dennis simply widened his stance slightly, riding out the motion like he was on a boat in gentle waves. "All teams, magnitude 7.2, epicenter grid 47 alpha," he said into his communicator, his voice perfectly calm. "Coastal response protocols now. Medical teams deployed to Varesh. Engineering, I need structural assessments on all evacuation centers within the affected zone." The response was immediate and coordinated. On the screens around them, Lyra watched human teams shift from their assigned tasks to emergency response without hesitation. Shuttles that had been loading evacuees changed course toward Varesh. Medical personnel grabbed equipment and ran for transport. It was like watching a single organism respond to threat, every part working in perfect synchronization. "You're not afraid," Lyra whispered. Dennis glanced at her, and for the first time she saw something like sympathy in his eyes. "Doctor, I grew up in California. Earthquakes are just Tuesdays where I come from. This is bad for you, but it's manageable for us." Manageable. A disaster that had Serenarans crying in the streets was manageable to these Deathworlders. In Varesh, human rescue teams were already moving through collapsed structures. Lyra watched the camera feeds in horror and fascination. A building had pancaked, 3 stories compressed into rubble, and humans were crawling into spaces that looked like certain death. They moved with purpose, using equipment that could detect life signs and cutting tools that sliced through debris. One medic, a woman named Amy Reeves, pulled 3 Serenarans from a collapsed medical facility. Lyra watched as a support beam shifted, catching Amy's shoulder and pinning her against concrete. The woman's face tightened with pain, but she didn't scream. Instead, she braced herself and called for assistance while keeping her other hand on a Sarenaran child, monitoring the young one's breathing. "Get them out first," Amy said when her team arrived. "I'm stable, they're not." They evacuated the Sarenarans, then lifted the beam off Amy. Her shoulder was clearly injured, possibly fractured, but she refused treatment until every life sign in the building had been accounted for. Lyra saw her inject herself with something from a medical kit, saw the pain drain from her face as whatever drug took effect, and watched her return to searching for survivors. "Your people don't stop," Lyra said to Dennis. "Can't afford to," he replied. "People are counting on us." Young Pira, a Sarenaran barely into adulthood, had taken to following the human engineer Yuki Tanaka around like a shadow. Yuki was smaller than most humans, with quick hands and a gentle demeanor that made her less frightening than her compatriots. She was working on reinforcing an evacuation center when Pira finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been bothering him. "Why did you come? Your species gains nothing from this." Yuki paused in her welding, lifting her protective visor to look at him. "We gained the knowledge that 4 million people didn't die when we could have prevented it. That's not nothing, Pira." "But you risk yourselves. That medic, Amy, she was injured. Others have been hurt. Some of your people are exhausted to the point of collapse, for strangers." Yuki set down her tools and sat on a crate, gesturing for Pira to join her. "Let me tell you about Earth. We've survived ice ages that covered half our planet in glaciers. We've endured plagues that killed millions. We've fought wars that nearly destroyed us. We've faced climate disasters, asteroid impacts, solar storms, and every natural catastrophe you can imagine." She pulled up images on her portable display. Pira saw a world of incredible beauty and terrible violence. Massive storms that dwarfed anything Sarenara had ever known. Volcanic eruptions that darkened skis for years. Earthquakes that reshaped continents. "We got good at disaster response because we had to," Yuki continued. "But somewhere along the way, we learned something important. The only thing that gets you through the disasters is helping each other. Not just humans helping humans, everyone helping everyone. Because when everything goes wrong, the only thing that matters is whether people stand together or fall apart." "Your planet made you hard," Pira said. Yuki smiled. "Our planet made us survivors, but we chose to be the kind of survivors who help others. That's the difference." The evacuation continued at a relentless pace. Humans worked their brutal shifts without complaint, moving from task to task with mechanical efficiency that somehow never lost its human core. Lyra watched them save Sarenaran cultural artifacts when they had every excuse to leave them behind. She saw them adjust evacuation schedules to accommodate religious observances they didn't understand. They preserved pieces of Sarenaran identity even while racing against planetary death. But it was the small moments that struck her most deeply. A human soldier sharing his rations with a Sarenaran child who was too frightened to eat the unfamiliar evacuation food. An engineer who worked an extra 4 hours, unpaid, to finish a playground at a temporary housing site because she thought the children needed something normal. A medic who sat with a dying elder who couldn't be saved, holding her hand and singing a Sarenaran morning song she had learned phonetically. The humans mourned Sarenaran losses like they were their own people. They grieved the cultural sites that couldn't be saved. They got angry at inefficiencies that cost time, because time meant lives. One evening, Lyra found Yuki asleep at her workstation, tools still in hand. The woman had been working for 20 hours straight, pushing her body past any reasonable limit. Lyra gently removed the tools and placed a blanket over the exhausted engineer. Dennis found her there. "She does that," he said quietly. "We all do. It's hard to stop when you know people are depending on you." "You're going to burn yourselves out," Lyra said. Dennis nodded. "Probably. But we'll burn out after everyone's safe, not before. That's the deal we made with ourselves when we took this job. Around them, the human operation continued its endless rhythm, fighting time and geology to save a species they had only just met. Everything went wrong on day 47. The evacuation was 60% complete, ahead of schedule, when Serenara's southern volcanic chain erupted with catastrophic force. Lyra's models had predicted volcanic activity, but not for another 3 weeks. The planet was dying faster than anyone had calculated. Ash clouds bloomed into the atmosphere, turning day into twilight across 3 continents. Toxic gases flooded low-lying areas. Lava flows cut off 2 major population centers, trapping nearly 300,000 Serenarans behind barriers of molten rock. The timeline that had seemed tight but manageable collapsed into impossibility. Rebecca Stone stood in the command center, surrounded by screens showing disaster after disaster. Her jaw was set, her eyes hard as she processed information faster than Lyra could follow. Around her, human personnel worked with controlled urgency, the calm professionalism cracking slightly under the weight of the catastrophe. "Give me options," Rebecca said. Dennis pulled up population maps. "We can save the majority. Priority evacuate the accessible zones, maximize our transport efficiency, and we can probably get 3.4 million out before the ash makes flight impossible." "That leaves 600,000 behind," Rebecca said flatly. "Captain, the ash clouds are spreading. In 12 hours, atmospheric flight becomes suicidal. In 24, it becomes impossible. We have to make a choice." The room went silent. Lyra felt her heart sinking as she understood what was happening. The humans were going to do what the Galactic Council had done to her people: calculate acceptable losses, choose who lived based on logistics and efficiency. Rebecca turned to her flight coordinator, a weathered man named Carlos Diaz. "Carlos, what's our shuttle tolerance for ash?" Carlos pulled up technical specifications. "Standard protocols say we abort at ash density index 15. Above that, engine damage becomes likely. Above 25, it's fatal." "What's likely versus certain?" "Captain, I can't recommend." "I'm not asking for recommendations. I'm asking for facts. What density can we physically fly in before the shuttles stop working?" Carlos hesitated, then pulled up different data. "If we accept engine damage as inevitable and plan for mechanical failures, we could push to index 35. Maybe 40 if we're desperate and lucky. But we'd be losing birds, ma'am. We'd be losing people." Rebecca nodded slowly. Then she turned to her entire crew. "New parameters. We're not choosing who lives. We're changing the equation. Strip every safety margin. Push every limit. Fly in conditions that would get you court-martialed in any sane operation. We're going to pull everyone out or die trying." "Captain," Dennis started. "That's an order," Rebecca cut him off. "We didn't come here to save most of a civilization. We came here to save all of it. If the universe doesn't like that, the universe can file a complaint." The operation transformed from organized efficiency into controlled chaos. Shuttles began flying routes that violated every safety protocol ever written. Pilots pushed through ash clouds so thick that navigation became more instinct than science. Engine failure rates skyrocketed. 3 shuttles crashed, their crews surviving but their craft destroyed. And the humans just kept flying. Carlos Diaz became a legend in those 72 hours. He made 47 trips through ash clouds that should have killed him, evacuating a remote settlement that every logical calculation said should be abandoned. His shuttle's engines were so damaged by the end that they had to be completely replaced, but he'd brought out 12,000 Serenarans who would have died. Lyra watched him stumble off his shuttle after the final trip, ash-stained and exhausted, barely able to stand. When someone asked him why he'd risked it, he just shrugged. "They were there. I had a shuttle. Math was simple." The human ground teams were just as relentless. They operated in toxic environments that required sealed suits and external oxygen. Volcanic gases that would kill a Sarenaran in seconds were just another hazard to work around. Teams extracted people from zones that geology said were already lost, racing lava flows and dodging pyroclastic surges. Amy Reeves, her shoulder still healing from the earthquake injury, led a medical team into a hospital surrounded by toxic gas. They evacuated every patient, running multiple trips through an atmosphere that was actively trying to kill them. On her last trip out, her suit developed a leak. She held her breath for the final 200 meters, carrying an elderly Sarenaran who couldn't move quickly, and collapsed the moment they reached safe air. Dr. James Park, the human physician, worked on her while simultaneously directing other medics. "You're insane," he told Amy as he sealed her suit leak. "Probably," she agreed, her voice hoarse. "But did we get everyone?" "We got everyone." "Then it was worth it." The 72-hour push was brutal. Humans collapsed from exhaustion, were treated with stimulants and IV fluids, and went back to work. They flew missions that had survival probabilities in the single digits. They operated equipment until it broke, then fixed it with improvised solutions and operated it some more. And they lost people. A shuttle went down in an ash cloud, killing 5 crew and 40 evacuees. A ground team was caught by a sudden lava flow, 2 humans and their Sarenaran charges dying together. Equipment failures, toxic exposure, structural collapses. The cost mounted. But they never stopped. Every loss seemed to fuel their determination rather than break it. They mourned their dead and kept working. They honored the fallen by saving everyone they could reach. When the ash finally cleared enough for assessment, Lyra ran the numbers with trembling hands. 3.97 million Sarenarans evacuated, out of 4 million total population. 30,000 couldn't be reached in time. 30,000 souls lost to ash and lava and the simple mathematics of catastrophe. The humans were devastated. Lyra watched Rebecca Stone read the casualty reports, saw the captain's hands shake as she processed the numbers. 99.25% saved, a miracle by any objective measure. But the humans didn't see a miracle. They saw 30,000 failures. "We should have moved faster," Rebecca whispered. "We should have anticipated the early eruption. We should have." "You saved nearly 4 million people," High Keeper Orath said gently. "You achieved the impossible." "We left 30,000 behind," Rebecca said, and there were tears in her eyes. 30,000 people who trusted us to save them. That night, Lyra witnessed something she would never forget. The humans held a memorial service for the Sarenarans they couldn't save. They read names, lit candles, and mourned strangers as deeply as they would mourn their own families. They wept for people they had never met, carrying the weight of lives they couldn't reach. These Deathworlders, these violent survivors from a hell planet, cried for Sarenaran losses like the deaths were personal wounds. And Lyra finally understood. They weren't strong because they didn't feel. They were strong because they felt everything and kept going anyway. New Haven looked nothing like Sarenara. Where Lyra's homeworld had been gentle and perfect, the human colony was rough and challenging. Higher gravity pulled at her constantly. Weather patterns were aggressive, bringing actual storms with wind and rain. The sun was harsher, the nights colder, the landscape marked by the scars of active tectonics. And yet somehow, it felt safer than Sarenara had in its final days. The human colony had a population of 2 million. They were hosting 4 million refugees, a ratio that should have been impossible. Lyra discovered why when she arrived at her assigned housing and found a human family packing to leave. "You're moving out?" Lyra asked, confused. "Were we assigned incorrectly?" The human woman smiled. She was older, with gray in her hair and calluses on her hands that spoke of hard labor. "No, you're in the right place. This is your home now. We're doubling up with our neighbors for a while." You're giving us your home. Lyra felt something twist in her chest. You need it more than we do. We can make do. You folks need time to recover. The woman hefted a bag over her shoulder. Place has good bones. Kitchen equipment is labeled. If you need anything, we're 3 houses down. Don't hesitate to ask. They left before Lyra could properly thank them. The entire family cheerfully cramming themselves into a space half the size with neighbors who welcomed them without complaint. This pattern repeated across New Haven. Humans gave up their homes, their space, their comfort. They shared food, clothing, equipment. The colonial government had offered compensation, but most humans refused it. They simply helped because helping was needed. Pyrrha found Lyra a week later, his eyes bright with discovery. Come see what the humans built. He led her to what had been an empty field. Now it held something Lyra recognized immediately, a traditional Sarenaran gathering hall, built in the architectural style of their home world. Humans were still working on it, following designs they must have pulled from Sarenaran databases, adapting materials they had available to create something that felt like home. Yuki was there, directing the construction. She had traded her engineering uniform for casual work clothes, but her precision was unchanged. When she saw Pyrrha and Lyra, she waved them over. What do you think? We used local timber but shaped it according to your traditional methods. Had to improvise on some of the joinery since we don't have the same materials, but the structural integrity is solid. You're building us a piece of home, Lyra said softly. Yuki looked uncomfortable with the emotion in Lyra's voice. You lost everything. Seemed wrong not to try to give some of it back. Plus, it gives our people something to do with their hands, helps process the grief. The grief. The humans were still carrying the weight of the 30,000 they couldn't save. Lyra had seen it in how they moved, the shadow that lingered behind their eyes. These Deathworlders who seemed invincible were haunted by their limitations. Yuki, why did your people really come? Lyra asked. Dennis said you know what it's like when nobody comes. What did he mean? Yuki was quiet for a long moment, her hands still on the wooden beam she'd been shaping. Earth has a complicated history. We've faced disasters, wars, catastrophes. Sometimes help came. Sometimes it didn't. We learned the hard way what it means to be abandoned when you need help most. She turned to look at Lyra. We decided a long time ago that we'd never let that happen to someone else if we could prevent it, because we remember how it feels. That evening, High Keeper Oreth addressed both species in the newly completed gathering hall. Sarenarans filled one side, humans the other, 2 civilizations brought together by catastrophe and compassion. You saved us when no one else would, Oreth said, his ancient voice carrying clearly. You risked everything for strangers. You gave us your homes, your resources, your very safety. How can we possibly repay such a debt? Governor Michelle Torres of New Haven stood to respond. She was a sturdy woman with sun-weathered skin and the direct manner of someone who'd built a world with her own hands. High Keeper, with respect, you don't owe us repayment. You owe us the same thing we'd owe you if the situations were reversed, to pass it on. Someday, someone else will need help. Maybe you'll be the ones who answer. That's the only payment we need. The cultural exchange that followed was organic and beautiful. Sarenarans taught music, art, philosophy. Their understanding of mathematical harmonics was centuries beyond human knowledge. Their approach to conflict resolution, evolved in a world without violence, offered perspectives humans had never considered. In return, humans taught practical resilience, how to fix things with improvised materials, how to stay calm in disasters, how to assess risk and push through fear. They shared their literature, their history, their painful journey from a world that tried to kill them to a species that helped others. Lyra spent hours in the human archives, reading their history with growing understanding. She saw the pattern repeated across centuries. Disasters followed by rebuilding, conflicts followed by reconciliation, falls followed by rises. Humanity's entire story was one of enduring, adapting, and refusing to give up. But woven through that history was something else. Stories of people helping strangers, accounts of communities coming together in crisis, records of individuals who risked everything for others. The humans called it different things over different eras, but the core was always the same, the belief that people should help people. "You chose compassion," Lyra said to Yuki one day. "Your world gave you every reason to be cruel, to be selfish, to only care for your own, but you chose differently." Yuki smiled. "Our world taught us how to survive, we taught ourselves how to live. There's a difference." Pyrrha had started training with human rescue teams. Lyra watched him learn techniques for disaster response, saw him build strength in New Haven's higher gravity, observed him absorbing the human philosophy of never accepting acceptable losses. He was changing, becoming something new, neither fully Saranaren nor human, but perhaps something better. Other young Saranarans joined him. They learned human resilience while teaching human students Saranaren wisdom. The two species were blending, not into homogeneity but into synthesis. One morning, Lyra woke to find Amy Reeves teaching Saranaren medical students advanced trauma care. The human medic's shoulder had healed, though she still moved it carefully. She demonstrated techniques with patience, explaining concepts that had been developed on a world where injuries were common and resources were often scarce. "On Earth, we learn to make do with less," Amy told her students. "Sometimes you won't have the perfect equipment or ideal conditions. You work with what you have because the alternative is giving up, and giving up means people die." The students practiced on training dummies, their delicate Saranaren hands learning to apply pressure, seal wounds, stabilize injuries. Skills they'd never needed before but would carry forward into whatever future awaited them. Lyra found Rebecca Stone watching the training session. The captain looked older than she had during the evacuation, the weight of command and loss having etched new lines around her eyes. 14 other species have contacted Earth," Rebecca said quietly. "Quiet requests, not through official channels. They heard what we did here. They want help with their own disasters, their own crises. The Galactic Council is furious." "And you'll help them," Lyra said. "It wasn't a question." Rebecca smiled. "Yeah, we will, because that's what you do." Lyra looked at the Saranarans and humans working together, learning from each other, building something new. Two species that should never have met, brought together by disaster and transformed by mutual respect. "Thank you," Lyra said simply, "for everything." Rebecca shook her head. "Thank you for trusting us, for giving Deathworlders a chance when every instinct probably told you to run. You saw past what we are to who we are. That takes courage too." In the distance, another group of humans was building something new, working alongside Saranarans who were learning to shape the rougher materials of their new world. The sound of construction, of creation, of life continuing despite everything. The Deathworlders had brought more than rescue. They brought hope. The Galactic Council chambers were designed to be impressive, all soaring architecture and displays of wealth from 47 civilized species. Lyra stood in the center of that grandeur, feeling small and out of place. High Keeper Oreth stood beside her, his ancient presence providing some comfort. The council representatives sat in elevated positions, looking down on the floor where petitioners stood. They were beautiful, every one of them. Elegant beings from gentle worlds, their features refined by millennia of peace and prosperity. Not a scar among them, not a sign of struggle or hardship. "The Saranaren petition for formal alliance with Earth is denied," the council speaker announced. The speaker was a V-Rin, their crystalline features catching the light as they spoke. "Furthermore, we strongly advise against continued association with Deathworld species. Such relationships are dangerous and destabilizing to galactic peace." Lyra had prepared for this. She'd known the council would reject them, but hearing it stated so formally, so coldly, ignited something in her chest that she'd never felt before. Anger. Dangerous? Lyra stepped forward, her voice carrying despite her size. You want to discuss danger. Saranara was dying. We sent you data, projections, pleas for help. You had the technology to save us. You had the resources. You simply chose not to use them. The economic calculations, a Tau Prime merchant began. I am not finished. Lyra cut them off, surprised by the steel in her own voice. Months with humans had changed her. You call Earth a death world, you call humans dangerous. And you're right, they are dangerous. They come from a planet that tried to kill them at every turn. They evolved as predators, as survivors, as creatures that refused to accept defeat. She pulled up holographic displays showing the evacuation. Humans flying through ash clouds. Humans pulling Saranarans from collapsing buildings. Humans weeping over the 30,000 they couldn't save. But they are the only ones who came. When we called for help, every civilized species found a reason to refuse. The humans, these dangerous Deathworlders, dropped everything and traveled across the galaxy to save people they'd never met. They risked their lives, sacrificed their comfort, gave us their homes. They saved 3.97 million Saranarans and mourned the 30,000 they couldn't reach as if each one was personally their fault. The council chamber was silent. You call yourselves civilized, Lyra continued, her voice shaking with emotion she could no longer contain. You've built beautiful stations and elegant societies. You've created art and philosophy and mathematics. And yet when people were dying, you calculated profit margins. You weighed costs against benefits. You let 4 million beings face extinction because saving them wasn't economically optimal. She turned slowly, looking at each council member in turn. The humans taught me something. Civilization isn't measured by your architecture or your technology. It's measured by who you help when helping is hard. It's measured by what you do when nobody's watching and there's no reward. By that standard, you are not civilized. You're just comfortable. This is insulting, the Viren speaker protested. This is truth, High Keeper Orath said, his ancient voice cutting through the chamber. The Saranaran people formally withdraw our petition for council membership. We will not join an organization that values commerce over compassion, that chooses comfort over courage. We stand with Earth and humanity. They walked out together, leaving the council in chaos behind them. The journey back to New Haven took 3 weeks. When they arrived, they found the integration had progressed even further. Mixed crews of humans and Saranarans were working on expansion projects. Children of both species played together in parks. The cultural exchange had deepened into genuine friendship. Rebecca met them at the landing pad, and Lyra could tell from her expression that she already knew what had happened. The council rejected the alliance. We rejected them, Lyra corrected. We chose you instead. Rebecca looked uncomfortable. Lyra, we're not perfect. We're violent, competitive, sometimes cruel. You've seen our history. We've done terrible things to each other. But you're trying to be better, Lyra said. That's what matters. You came from darkness and chose light. The council was born in light and chose darkness. I know which I'd rather stand beside. Pyrrha approached, now wearing a rescue responder uniform that mixed human and Saranaran design elements. Behind him came a dozen other young Saranarans, all training in disaster response. They moved differently now, with purpose and confidence that came from learning they could face challenges and overcome them. Captain Stone, we got a distress signal, Pyrrha reported. The Kalthiri home system is experiencing solar flare activity beyond their shielding capabilities. They're requesting evacuation assistance. Rebecca pulled up the data, her eyes scanning the information with practiced efficiency. That's 200 million people. We'll need more ships. The Saranarans are retrofitting our transport vessels, High Keeper Orath said. We may lack your disaster response experience, but we can contribute our technology and our willingness to help. Together, We can field a fleet larger than what you brought to save us." Amy Reeves stepped forward, medical kit already on her shoulder. "I volunteer for the medical team." Carlos Diaz grinned. "Guess we're flying into another mess. Who's surprised?" Dennis Walsh was already pulling up logistics. "We'll need staging areas, supply lines, coordination with local authorities." Lyra watched the humans snap into action, their purpose clear and their resolve unshakable. But now they weren't alone. Saranarans were joining them, bringing different skills and perspectives but sharing the same fundamental belief that people should help people. "We're really doing this?" Lyra asked. "Building a new kind of rescue organization?" Rebecca smiled. "We're doing something better. We're showing the galaxy what civilization should look like, one rescue at a time." The fleet began assembling over New Haven. Human vessels alongside retrofitted Saranaran ships, mixed crews running drills, learning to work together. Combining human resilience with Saranaran innovation. Two species that had been strangers 6 months ago, now functioning as a unified force. Lyra stood in the observation deck, watching the preparations. Behind her, the door opened and Yuki entered, carrying 2 cups of the earth beverage called coffee that Lyra had developed a taste for. "Thinking deep thoughts?" Yuki asked. "Thinking about how wrong we were," Lyra said. "We thought the galaxy was civilized and Earth was savage, but you're the ones who understand what civilization really means." Yuki handed her the coffee. "We learned it the hard way. Maybe that's the point. You can't really understand compassion until you've needed it. You can't value helping others until you've been helpless yourself. Earth didn't make us kind. Earth made us survivors. We chose to be survivors who help." The fleet completed its preparation checks. 200 ships, carrying thousands of personnel from 2 species, ready to save people they'd never met from a disaster they had no obligation to fix. Rebecca's voice came over the shipwide communication. "All hands, prepare for departure. The Kelthiri need us, and we're going to show them what it means when someone answers the call. Let's make sure every single one of them knows they're not alone." The ships began moving, a constellation of hope departing from New Haven toward a distant disaster. At the lead was Rebecca's flagship, but beside it flew the first joint Saranaran human vessel, its hull bearing a symbol designed by both species, a hand reaching toward stars. Lyra pulled up the sensor data showing the fleet's formation. Beautiful and purposeful, moving with unified intent toward people who desperately needed help. This was the future she wanted. Not the cold calculations of the Galactic Council, but the warm determination of beings who chose to care. "You know," Lyra said to Yuki, "we're going to change the galaxy." Yuki smiled. "That's the idea. One rescue at a time, we show them there's a better way. Maybe eventually they'll figure out that civilization isn't about how comfortable you are. It's about what you do when someone needs help." The fleet jumped to FTL, leaving New Haven behind. Ahead of them lay the Kelthiri system, millions of beings in danger, and the opportunity to prove once again that the measure of civilization wasn't found in grand architecture or ancient philosophy. It was found in 3 simple words: "We are coming." The Deathworlders and their allies had answered another call, and somewhere in the galaxy, the old order was beginning to crack, replaced by something better, something earned through action rather than claimed through comfort. The rescue had become a movement, the movement had become hope, and hope, as the humans had taught the Saranarans, was the first step toward building something worth fighting for.